Matt, well, we're going on to album number 3. You want to go ahead and
Yeah.
tell the viewers what it is, or listeners, I should say, what it is and what the numbers are?
So this is a band called This Heat with their album This Heat, coming in at number 387 in the 1970 best ever albums, number 38 in 1979, number 1945 of all time. It's their second highest rated album behind 19 Deceit, and it's not on Rolling Stone's list. I'm guessing this is a 1001 album. I need to hear before I die.
Correct. This is 1001 Before You Die.
All right, and you're up, John.
I am. Boy, was this an interesting album. It is a hard album to classify. I know earlier we talked about the fact that we covered that Residence album before. I felt like this one is a little bit more in that vein at times in terms of the fact that I think this album is as much about sound as it is about music at times, because it is so experimental. There are times when I'm thinking to myself, are they putting sounds together to hear what the sounds are like? And then, of course, it goes back to that debate we've had multiple times in the 70s at different times, where if something is sounds but does not seem to be tied into how we have traditionally defined music, I think we've come to the conclusion that it is still music, but it is the type of music that it is hard for us to evaluate in the scale of music, because we are still refining our ability, right, to do that. Now, what are some things that are on this? Now there are guitars and drums and vocals, like traditional instruments on this album.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There's also a metric shit ton of tape distortion on this album as well. So a second one this week where that is happening for sure. This is where I want to kind of bounce back and forth with you, because it is almost impossible to tease out the various sounds that are playing at different times, because there isn't a linearity at all to this, where there isn't even that like motoric type, in krautrock, there's motoric, there's elements of uniformity. Like at times it's there, but it seems almost designed to blend together at times, I feel like, where it's just sonically, it's almost as if somebody went into the recording studio and said, what would it sound like if we made these sounds together and then did them at different rates and at different styles, and then, okay, what happens if we then distort it? And I find that stuff interesting. It's just very difficult to evaluate in a music podcast as a piece of music, if that makes sense. So it's much easier for me to say, like, at bits and pieces, that these instruments exist, but this band doesn't have a sound. Like what's their guitar tone or guitar? There isn't. There are guitars present that are at times used to be another sound in a pastiche of other sounds, but it's not like, and here's where like it plays the bridge, or here's where they're going for a melody. I'm almost certain that that's a little bit of what the design was. So like I can give other musings, and I think I'm going to want to when you guys talk about it, but I want to get what you guys, were able to pull out of this album too. So I think, Josh, you're next. So what'd you pull out?
Yeah, this album, even more so than Throbbing Gristle, is experimental by nature. I mean, you have the album bookended by what are essentially test patterns of noise, test card blue at the top and test card yellow ending the album. So that sets the stage right there. They aren't too long, 45 seconds and a minute, but it really kind of sets the scene. And I could not tell you what differentiates one song from the next at this point, but they are a collection of different sounds and experiments with sound, and
like
you
loops is another thing I
Yes.
didn't mention. Definitely loops.
Yep, and throwing everything in the kitchen sink, it seems like in the music. And within the same song, there's kind of changing tempos and patterns, and sometimes they're like on the was it third track, Not Waving. There's like wailing and droning sounds throughout. It's pretty discordant at times, and like in the track Water, the fourth track. I did like some of the tracks. Again, probably hewing more to traditional beats. There's a drum beat on Twilight Furniture that carries throughout the whole track, which I found pretty appealing. But then you go right into other songs like 24-track Loop, which almost sounds like metal on metal at times, and like a screeching, dragging sound. And then Diet of Worms, which was maybe the hardest song to listen to, which has some high-pitched noise in it. And then back to a more traditional sounding song, The Fall of Saigon, which actually even had traditional sounding lyrics in one sense. It's like they just tried to drop everything and make a traditional sounding song.
Well, and that's one of the few where they did have elements that you could define as what I said before, is like the motoric beat of krautrock. There were some elements where it's like, oh, there's some rhythm, built in. Yeah.
So yeah, again, this album is very hard to define by intention. They are probably, what Matt was saying also, not an album you would typically listen to all the way through, not intentionally, or only if intentionally doing it like we did. And it is another one of those albums that is an interesting experiment. It's not going to be something that is quote unquote enjoyable to listen to, but it's more thought-provoking and pushing your boundaries as to what music could be.
So this is an interesting album for me, because I think of all the albums that we've discussed, that we've said, oh, this is a challenging listen, or this was hard to get through, or it's hard to make sense of this. I'm thinking things like, certainly, the pop group, comes to mind, or Suicide, another one that was kind of hard for me to listen to, Pere Ubu. Maybe to a lesser extent something like the Slits, but this album I kind of liked it. At first I was very, very put off. I was like, oh great, this is gonna be another chore. Thanks, John. But as I listened to it, and I listened to it like a second and third time, and I'm kind of like, yeah, this is a challenge. It's discordant. It's definitely trying to make me uncomfortable. But there were enough elements in here that I found myself liking for the most part. So it's kind of an interesting thing, because usually I'm turned off by this stuff, and I'm like, oh God, But I don't know. There's something appealing about this, and I found a number of different elements to this, and other touch points that I felt sounded like another band or another kind of thing, which I'll get to in a second. But I actually, when I took a few notes on this, and this was something that I felt was more industrial, particularly that opening, not the opening track, but the second track, Horizontal Hold, has more of like that seemed to me more of industrial. It's got this driving kind of drum beat, and it's got this guitar sound that definitely sounds like this distorted, what I would think of when I hear the word industrial.
And I agree, Matt, on that. And that is another one of the few tracks that has like a consistent beat.
Yeah.
Do you think industrial has to sound like machines making music, or like being in a factory or something?
That's kind of I would say so. I mean, for me, that's kind of like, I mean, I'm sure that doesn't have to be like that, but if I hear that, that's probably where my brain's going to go, and it did there. But I thought that there was some stuff in here like Not Waving. I think that reminded me of early '60s Syd Barrett, Pink Floyd, like when Pink Floyd was kind of doing the Saucer Full of Secrets, which I guess actually that's where Syd Barrett started to kind of fall to the wayside, but that early Pink Floyd experimentation that they were doing, that's the stuff that's happening there reminded me very much of that. The song Twilight Furniture, right? Twilight Furniture, that sounded like Can, like especially with the vocals, because he's kind of like doing that, like the vocals are kind of in the background, and they're kind of, they're kind of wavery and like kind of like, I don't know, moany or chanty or whatever. That sounded like definitely like a Can song, and I liked Can, so I kind of like that. What was it? I think it was Music Escaping Gas. Yeah, that one you said that was the most challenging. Music Like Escaping Gas. That reminded me of something like you would have heard on in 2001. Like when they're in space and stuff like that,
okay.
and like at the movie.
I think Matt,
like,
Josh said Diet of Worms was the most challenging.
Or was that the one?
Yeah.
Maybe that was it.
Well, yeah, I didn't even write
They're both kind of like that. But yes, but there was parts of this where probably both of those you could say this about, but I was like, I felt like that might have been a soundscape in 2001: A Space Odyssey. I did like The Fall of Saigon. That seemed like a very, I don't know, it was a little repetitive, but it was like that, and that had an industrial sound in the background as well. It's almost like that was like the percussion, and it had a cool little part going through it. So definitely a challenging record, definitely something that kept me on edge, or I wouldn't say I was at ease with this album, but I don't know. There was something about this that I really just, I didn't mind, and I kind of felt was just more interesting. It was kind of cool. I definitely got down with this more. So I was surprised. I'm surprised by that, and I don't know if I can exactly indicate why. Because usually, like I said, something like this would make me go, "Yeah, okay, there's elements here." But overall, I kind of like this. So, I'm thumbs up.
Well, and once again, I think you've been primed for this, right, Matt? Where now you're getting a little bit better idea of, okay, when instead of just something seeming challenging and like, ugh, where's the stuff with? Now you're like, all right, I can kind of draw differences between challenging in a way that there's an entry point and challenging in a way that I hate, or challenging in a way that I don't know one way or the other because I just don't have the template yet to digest this. Yeah.
I think maybe being primed for it helps a little bit. But again, I also don't, we just did the pop group 2 weeks ago. I was primed for that and I hated that. You know what I mean? And there were also other elements in here that just, I don't know, probably spoke to me it just on a level that I can get down with just in general. It's not for everybody. This was not something I was able to play downstairs in the kitchen when I was like cooking, because Sherry's trying to do work and she's like, "Can you turn that off?" Because it's just I can't focus. It's like, yeah, sorry, dear.
What would it be if like you played that and your wife wanted it off, but your daughter was like, "Oh my God, Dad! Like, what are you listening to? This music speaks to me."
Yeah,
it would be interesting, wouldn't it? If it was.
Well, we're a Democratic house. That's 2-1, so we'd be playing it. So you know.
So I also go ahead. I'm sorry, Josh.
I was gonna say, at this point, sometimes all it takes is something to grab onto that's enough to get you interested in the album, or a foot in the door in a way.
Well, and Matt, you mentioned not liking the pop group, and I think we know that I did find stuff that I liked in that. I liked some of the challenge. So I think the good thing is we're all starting to come in from different entry points on that. I also would like to mention, you know how in Rock Band you can create your own band and they give you like names that for your band that are pre-existing names that are
the
like a lot of the
Pomeranians.
Yeah, a lot of the songs on this are like Twilight Furniture, Horizontal Hold, Diet of Worms.
That's true.
It's like all like things that not waving. It's like seems like things that the Rock Band generator would make for song names. So I kind of found that very funny. Yeah.
Isn't the Diet of Worms like a historical religious thing or something? Yeah, I'm looking it up. Diet Worms of 1521. It's an assembly of the Holy Roman Empire by Charles V, and Martin Luther was there to renounce or reaffirm his views. So yeah, that's
wow. I'm usually the history guy, Josh. So good grab right there. I'm impressed.
Yeah, I knew it was sounded to that word diet. We think of it related to nutrition, but for some reason, I just remember my AP European history, I guess, from a long time ago.
Check out the big brain on Josh.
I'm sure your teacher's very proud right there, Josh. You can say it's
I'm
stuck.
using that knowledge now.
There you go. Well, it adds spice to the podcast that is CTS, Josh. So thank you.
It's probably pronounced worms, not worms.
Yep. And diet. Yeah. But I think I'm right in the middle on this one. I cannot turn it off or recommend for me. I think it's and I'm not punting there either. I think there were elements of it that interested me enough, and once again, not for someone looking for pop sensibility.
No.
But also I don't think if you have some background, especially I think in krautrock, because this
Yep.
to me is like Faust and Can, and yeah, if you were intrigued by anything in that genre, I definitely think this could be for you. And I think Matt made that early Pink Floyd stuff too is a really good call, Matt. There is a lot of elements there as well.
Well, it sounds like for you guys, this album was more easier to listen to or more interesting than the Throbbing Gristle album. Is that fair to say? Or not?
I like this better. I don't know if I would say this was easier to listen to. In fact, I think it might have been a harsher listen than Throbbing Gristle, but there was enough. There were more interesting elements in this, and I had a more of a positive feeling about it.
I don't know if I found either one better than the other. I felt they were both outside of the traditional accessibility, but I don't know if I felt they were very different albums. While they were both challenging albums, I didn't feel they were challenging in the same ways. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So for sure. Well, boy, we're going